go to church every week. Churches around the state have seen their numbers dramatically decline in recent years, and many are being forced to consolidate or shut down completely. Another study conducted by the Pew Research Center found that people who identify as LGBTQ are much less likely to participate in organized religion than their straight counterparts. Lastly, the LGBTQ community reflects a general trend of younger generations pulling away from organized religion, as shown in this graph from a study done by the Williams Institute in 2021 about LGBTQ Christians. These three facts provide context to my research because the downward trend in numbers of Christians, specifically young queer Christians, is increasing rapidly, and the division between Christianity and the LGBT community is also increasing. I grew up going to church every Sunday with my family. The community I found there was crucial to my development in understanding the world around me. Church offered me a second family of caring adults who supported me as I grew up. However, this support changed when I turned 12 and realized I was gay. At the same time, I was being taught in Sunday school that homosexuality was unnatural and a sin. I was confused about how the people who had loved and supported me my whole life could be telling me that who I was wrong. This confusion led to long nights searching the internet for answers and representation. I couldn't be the only queer Christian out there. So I started looking for research that had been conducted about other queer Christians. However, I found mostly research about the negative impacts of harmful religious experiences on LGBTQ people. One of the studies I found was conducted by health researchers in 2012, where they found that LGBTQ individuals who have negative religious experiences, especially in childhood, are more likely to have higher levels of internalized homophobia. Many LGBTQ people who grow up in an unaffirming Christian environment struggle with cognitive dissonance relating to their conflicting spiritual and sexual identities. Another study that I found was conducted in 2018 and looked at homophobia and discrimination of Southern churches toward their LGBTQ members. It found that LGBTQ Christians are discouraged and hurt by the way they are treated by their churches, but that they are also desperate to find ways to work with their churches and be welcomed into them. This study was closer to what I was trying to find, but I wanted actual examples of people finding welcoming communities and being able to participate in organized religion while still being able to live as their true selves. According to a study by researchers at the Williams Institute, 5.3 million LGBTQ individuals identify as Christian. But where are their stories? While searching for these stories, I found a 2022 study that focused on the experiences of 11 LGBTQ Christians ages 60 and up living in Southern Appalachia. Researchers used in-depth interviews to gather data about the experiences of the participants, which they then used to analyze themes that they recognized across multiple participants. This was the first study I found that focused on the experiences of LGBTQ Christians in the church instead of specifically focusing on the negative impacts of organized religion. But I wanted to narrow the focus even more. I wanted to look at specifically why people choose to be Christian, and I wanted to look specifically at Vermont, where the population is generally more liberal. This led me to my research question. How do LGBTQ identifying adult Christians living in Vermont reconcile their faith with their sexuality and/or gender? I chose to include only adults because people under 18 don't always have the choice of whether or not to participate in organized religion, and their identities are still forming. Originally, I wanted to include people living in rural areas of New England, but that was too wide of a scope and was logistically difficult. I decided to just include people from Vermont because I wanted to study my home state, and I already knew some people living here who met my criteria. The most common method used in this field is to conduct in-depth interviews with participants who fit the criteria, and then analyze the interviews to find common themes among the participants' individual experiences. like the method used in the study in Southern Appalachia. I found participants for the study using purposive sampling, which is the best method to use when trying to find participants who fit a specific set of criteria. I reached out to people I knew met the criteria, and then I asked them to connect me with others who they also knew met the criteria. This created a snowball effect of finding participants, similar to the method used in other studies I looked at. 4 of the participants I interviewed were pastors at various UCC churches from around the state. UCC stands for United Church of Christ, and it is the most progressive denomination of Christianity. The churches are usually certified as open and affirming towards the LGBTQ community. Vermont has 123 UCC churches. Out of these 4 pastors that I interviewed, 2 identified as gay men, 1 identified as a lesbian woman, and 1 identified as non-binary. 2 of the participants I interviewed were lay people at a United Methodist church, and they both identified as trans men. And then the 7th participant was a lay person at a UCC church in southern Vermont and identified as a lesbian woman. I conducted interviews with these 7 participants. Each interview lasted between 20 and 90 minutes. I used the sources I found in my initial research to develop a list of interview questions that I asked each participant. Before conducting interviews, I received informed consent from all of the participants agreeing to be interviewed and have our conversation recorded, as well as have the data I collected be used in this study and shared with others. I then conducted the interviews using the questions I developed as a guide while maintaining a casual conversational tone so participants could discuss what they felt was most important to their experience. This model also allowed me to ask follow-up questions or ask other questions if something unpredicted came up. After I completed the interviews, I transcribed all of the recordings by hand and then printed the transcripts out. I then read the first transcript, highlighting themes as I went. When I finished reading the transcript, I typed up all of the themes that I had highlighted and recorded the number of times that each theme was discussed. I then read through the rest of the transcripts, adding new themes to my list as they appeared, and tallying the number of times a theme was discussed. After I had done this for all 7 interviews, I read through all of the transcripts again with my complete list of themes and tallied the number of times each theme was discussed. For example, in the first transcription, I recognized the theme of finding a welcoming church community, so I added that to my original list of themes. After that, whenever I found the same theme again in any of the interviews, I would add a tally to that theme in my spreadsheet and identify which transcript it was in. In total, I identified 28 themes that I sorted into 3 categories: personal, supports, and realizations. The personal category included these 13 themes that correlated with actions that a person took in their lives or a personal experience that was transformative for them. The supports category included these 10 themes that represented supportive people or communities that were influential in a participant's experience. Lastly, the realization category included these 5 themes that focused on a participant's beliefs and or feelings about something. The 2 themes that were discussed the most times by the most number of participants were learning and welcoming church community. 5 participants discussed how learning about and researching queer theology and the intersection of Christianity and sexuality and or gender helped them to reconcile their own faith with their sexuality and or gender identity. This theme was mentioned a total of 30 times across the 5 different interviews. 5 participants also discussed how being part of a welcoming church community helped them enter back into faith and organized religion. This theme was also mentioned a total of 30 times across 5 different interviews. My research was based on the idea that reconciling faith with sexual or gender identity is necessary for queer Christians to have peace in both their faith and sexual or gender identities. However, I did not consider the possibility that someone would not have a need to reconcile these 2 identities. Participant 4 grew up in a politically liberal Christian home and a supportive community that created an environment where participant 4 never experienced cognitive dissonance related to faith and sexuality. Participant 4 was one of the youngest people that I interviewed. Age and location likely played a factor in participant 4's experience compared to other older participants who grew up in more rural and conservative parts of the country. Another assumption I made was that once someone was able to reconcile their faith and sexuality and/or gender and found a supportive and welcoming church community, that they would no longer experience many of the difficulties that they had before. However, I found that this process is not that linear. 5 of the 7 participants discussed how they still experienced loneliness within their spiritual life due to a lack of diversity and understanding in their church communities. In reading other studies that were done in more urban or generally more diverse communities, I did not see this theme appear very often. Vermont has one of the oldest and whitest populations in the country. Many of the participants discussed how most of the people that attend their churches are over the age of 60, and 2 of the participants discussed how white supremacy and patriarchy likely plays a role in the lack of acceptance in churches. I was not able to interview 12 people like I was hoping to. This was mainly due to scheduling issues and my limited time frame. Although the small sample size allowed me to spend more time with each participant, enabling me to develop a deeper understanding of their experiences, I was not able to gain a very wide expanse of data. My participants were also mostly pastors, which is not representative of the larger population of Christians because most Christians are not pastors. Other factors were that most of the participants were part of the UCC denomination and also from mostly southern or western Vermont. These variables may have also contributed to the results that I found. Further research should look at a more representative sample of queer Christians. It would also be interesting to study the history of queer Christian pastors in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. Participant 1 spoke at length about the large number of queer pastors that have preached in the NEK over time. As far as the implications of my results within the context of the real world, it would be beneficial to promote more welcoming faith communities and create safe spaces for queer Christians to find community. Because so many people cited participating in welcoming communities as one of the most influential aspects of helping them reconcile their faith and sexuality or gender, churches looking to create more accepting and diverse spaces should work to make sure their community is welcoming and supportive of all people. Church communities should also make queer theology more accessible to LGBTQ people in their communities, because learning was also one of the most important factors in reconciling faith and sexuality or gender. Many of the participants I interviewed discussed how the church needs to radically reform its structure and role in communities if the trend of decreasing participation in organized religion is going to turn around. Interviewing these 7 queer Christians living in Vermont was more powerful than I could have imagined. I had never been able to talk to anyone about my experience before, and to find so many people eager to talk about their experiences was amazing. Queer Christians exist, and we need to tell our story. Thank you.
Hannah, that was excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you also for sharing your personal experience with this subject. That's so powerful. I've been in and out of Vermont my whole life, but I came back about 5 or 6 years ago after having been gone for about 25 years. And during that time, I was actually in many different parts of the country really strongly involved with the Unitarian Universalist Church. And now you said something, the UCC is I don't actually know if the Unitarians are considered a Christian denomination, because you said the UCC is the most, what was the word you used, welcoming?
Progressive, yeah.
Progressive, where I think it would be hard to find sometimes more progressive than the Unitarian Universalists.
Yeah.
But I am this was I was involved with them. The first one I was mostly involved with was actually out in California, which again gives it another degree of progressiveness. But it was so welcoming, and I learned so much from the LGBTQ members of the churches there. So I guess the question is, and you're nodding as I'm saying it, what role do you think, well, did you look at Unitarian Universalists, and what role, were you able to look maybe historically at the role they may have played in helping bring along their other Christian category, I don't know what they're called, denominations, the other denominations within the Christian church?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, 3 or 4 of the people I talked to who are now in the UCC started in the UU church. That's like what brought them back into Christianity. The UU church is not really considered Christian. I don't think it's kind of way out there, but it served for many people a way back into religion, because people like grew up like Catholic or like extremely like conservative Christian, so they didn't really see a way to enter back into Christianity. But the UU church offered this safe space for them, and then they went there, they found that welcoming community, but they were like, some people talked, participant 1 talked about this, how they still felt like they were missing something, more of the like, I don't know, just focus on like God and Jesus and Christianity, and that's what led them to the UCC church, which shared the supportiveness of the UU church, but also had more of the same traditions as typical Christianity.
Did you see a significant difference between any participants that had left Christianity and returned versus those that stayed and struggled?
Okay, so participant 4, who I talked about, was the only one that stayed with religion their whole life. So all of the other participants I spoke to, around like when they moved out of their house, their childhood home, they left the church, leaving organized religion and like personalizing faith or spirituality was an important factor in a lot of these. That's what they did, and then they came back either through the UU or the UCC or United Methodist Church, and Episcopal Church was the other one. So there was a major difference between participant 4 and all of the others, because participant 4 didn't have the need to really have that struggle. They grew up with family members who were pastors, who were supportive of them, so they never really felt that cognitive dissonance between sexuality and faith. But all of the other participants left organized religion and then focused more on their sexual identity or gender identity, and were able to figure that out, and then they came back to religion.
So, I like this, nice. I'm a Catholic, so there's a difference between Christianity and Catholics. Along your research journey, did you find any data on Catholics being queer? If so, is there a difference between the numbers of Christians being queer and Catholics being queer?
Yeah, so Catholicism is a part of Christianity, but I've focused mostly on Protestants. That was my initial choice, but then also I could not find any queer Catholics. I know there are queer Catholics, but I think the majority of queer Christians are in churches like the UCC, where they actually have this like open and affirming policy where they say right out front, like, we're welcoming and affirming. The church down the street, they're a UCC church that has the pride flag out there. So there are a lot more queer people that I think feel safer going to a church like that. I will say at least 2 of the people I interviewed grew up Catholic, and that was like really important to their identity, but they didn't feel like they could return to Catholicism because of the strictness of it.
Another round of applause. Okay, that concludes session 1 for us here in Fuller. If you're going to South Church, the Fireside, Colwell, or Mayo, you go to lunch. If you're staying here or going to Fuller Basement or the Construction Trade Shop or Brantview, go right to your venue. Lunch will be after the presentations. I did it in my pocket. So I need to get the attendance thing up. Here we go. Yeah, I'm getting it. Present. Yeah, so Kaylee, you go that time. Thank you.
Did Kendra leave one of these with you?
No, I didn't see it. All right. Yes, please, thank you. All right, let's see. Huh? Dr. Polsenberger, she's math, she does math. All right, who had F? Who had F through whatever? So, Kaylee, you go the last. Okay, great, thanks.
I'd put these right here, Hank.
Great. Oh, yeah, thanks, Jen.
Yep. I'll right back.
You had that one, and Ms. Lemieux had this one. Good evening. Yeah, E through L is good.
Where's our 4th microphone?
We have more pens? Yeah. What?
Where's our 4th?
Huh?
There's 4 microphones. Where's our 4th one?
I think we only need the 2.
I know. I'm just saying we had 4
Yeah.
of these microphones, and now we only have 3. So-
Taylor took one, I think.
Okay.
He grabbed one on me. Another pen. Let me. I do not. Let me grab one real fast from this viewer side. Oh, here we go. Good. Catherine, here. All right, as you enter A through D, check in at the end, E through L next, M through Q here, and R through Z with Ms. Lemieux. Everybody has a pen?
So I'm thinking we change out the batteries.
Right now?
Well, yeah, and get the other ones charging because they're halfway up there. So just in case if they like run out or whatever. But it's up to you. We can if you
I
want
mean,
to.
yeah, sure. If you really want to.
Well, I mean, just on the safer side.
And then I'm gonna need you. I want to do a sound check.
Yeah. Sounds good. I have batteries for you.
Ms. Lemieux? And you're gonna take the green ones back up and charge them?
Yeah, or you could charge them down here, but
I know.
they're not built for this
not
thing.
built for
Yeah.
those, yeah, that's all I'm gonna say.
You're right.
Whatever that is.
Liam watch you. Oh. If you want to. Yeah. I'm not gonna stop you. Alrighty.
Alright, you wanna go up so we can do
Yeah.
sound check? As soon as Mike gets back in the booth, yep. Don't need this one.
Those, I'm leaving these for Mr. Eaton.
Perfect.
Okay.
That works. Thank you. Session 2.
You get new ones for session 2, right?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Session 2.